Thank you all for standing, and welcome to this week's gathering of the Bloomington Rotary Club. I am your president, Sally Gaskill, and I'm so happy to see a full house here at the Frangipani and also on Zoom. Michael? To start our meeting today, we're going to observe a moment of silence. Thank you very much. You may be seated. And Sarah Laughlin, will you please come and give our reflection for this week?
Thank you, Sally. Sally asked me today to share my family's habitat story to get us warmed up for our speaker today. It began a long time ago for us. One of my late husband, Tim's best friends, Ray Valiant, was a gifted craftsman and a regular weekly volunteer at Habitat. When Ray died way too soon, Tim remembered him by making a monthly donation to Habitat. A few years later, our daughter Hannah became co-president of the Bloomington North Habitat chapter, the only high school group in the country to raise money for and build a complete house every year. One day, Hannah came home and said, "Dad, we need an adult construction manager, supervisor, and I volunteered you." Now, Tim, who was a custom home builder, as many of you know, had been happily writing those checks, but giving up his Saturdays in February to work with a bunch of 16-year-olds didn't really excite him. But what could he do? His beautiful daughter was asking, and he knew he had the right skills. A little prodding from me. So he agreed. They headed off on a freezing Saturday morning. Tim brought along all the Carhartts, gloves, hats, and hammers he had. No one froze to death, which was quite a victory. The next week, the kids were not too cool to bundle up, and they sported shiny new tool belts and hammers that they'd acquired, probably by asking their moms to take them to the hardware store during the week. More than that, they were so proud to be strong and capable and part of a high-performing team. For her part, Hannah learned to walk into the First National Bank, find the vice president, and ask him to pay for the t-shirts. She learned to run a tight meeting. She organized a fundraising event that raised enough money to pay for the next house. She recruited volunteers, students, and parents. She worked with the Habitat staff. And she and the volunteers worked side by side with the family whose decent, safe, and affordable house they were helping to build. After that experience, Tim was completely hooked. He sponsored or co-sponsored a house during the builder splits, I think for 3 or 4 years, until he was no longer able. Habitat dedicated the blitz to his memory in 2018. This month, Hannah volunteered at the Women's Build. Last week at the football game, she met the CEO of Whirlpool, who was in town to dedicate the IU Habitat House. Hannah and I also continue to be donors because we've seen the impact Habitat has on families, neighborhoods, and volunteers, young and old.
Sarah, thank you so much. That was a wonderful story. Thanks to our producer, Michael Shermas, our Zoom manager, Joy Harder, and our remote camera and mic operators, Martha Foster and Aaron Davis, for always stepping to the plate. Today, our greeter was Bill Perkins, and Sarah Laughlin is doing double duty as the roundabout reporter. I would like to ask Steve Engel to come forward because for the first time in many weeks, we have a volunteer from our club to welcome our guests and visiting Rotarians.
Well, I'm excited to see so many people here today. It's great to see such great attendance to our Rotary meeting. And I think it looks like we're on an upswing here. Anyway, we have several guests today, and I've asked that you would stand when we call your name so we can properly welcome you. Our first guest is Colleen Mckenna, who's a guest of Jim Bright. Next is John Armstrong, who's a guest of Sarah Laughlin. Then Bailey Goodlett is a guest of Owen Johnson. And John Taylor is a guest of Hank Water. Thank you, and feel free to come back anytime. You're always welcome at Rotary.
Thank you, Steve. We have some special birthdays this week. On October 21st, Mike Wade has a birthday, as does Charlotte Zitlow. And the next day, on October 22nd, Susie Graham. Susie, I forgot to ask if we have any guests on Zoom. I'm going out of order today, but I hope that works. Susie Graham, do we have any guests today on Zoom?
Sally, I have to apologize to be an abject failure in my role here doing this. It's challenging to see names. Sometimes people have a phone number to identify them. So it's really not always clear for me. What I would like to say is I know that we have a new member who I believe has not been inducted yet. Ruth Boshkoff was in our chat group. And so I want to welcome Ruth, not to steal her membership induction thunder. And I believe Diane Shoemaker and Mary Morgan, but I apologize. I don't know who their host is for the meeting. So I'm sorry.
Oh, Susie, you're doing a great job. Welcome, Ruth Boshkoff. We will be doing a new member induction fairly soon, in 2 weeks, I believe. We're really happy to have you here. So you won't be a visitor for very long. Diane Shoemaker is a member of the club through the NAACP. And Mary Morgan, now I know you were at the chamber. I'm not sure if Mary's visiting or if you're actually a member through some organization. Welcome to all of you.
I'm a guest of Jim Bright. Thank you.
Of course you are. Guest of Jim Bright. Thank you. Okay, now to member anniversaries. Each week I like to recognize people who have spent any number of years as a Rotarian. And this week we have some really interesting ones. First of all, past president Lawrence Snyder has been in our club only 6 years. He stepped to the plate early, plus 6 years in another club for 12 years total. Anne Wren has been a member of our club for 15 years. George Boone in our club for 13 years, plus 25 elsewhere for 38 years total as a Rotarian, not to be outdone by Bill Murphy, 14 years in our club, 28 years, otherwise making a total of 42 years as a Rotarian. That's a lot of service above self. Thank you all, and congrats to everyone. I have a few announcements today. First of all, thanks to everybody who attended our first Rotary Book Club meeting. We had a lot of fun. We had a really good discussion. We talked about Jim Madison's book, The KKK in the Heartland. We've decided to meet quarterly, and at least for the first few meetings, we're going to focus on books that have something to do with Indiana. So our next book is going to be Why Fish Don't Exist, a story of loss, love, and the hidden order of life by Lulu Miller, published last year. What does that have to do with Indiana, one might ask? Well, in fact, it's the story of David Starr Jordan, former president of Indiana University. We're going to meet in January over Zoom. Everybody's welcome. This time you're going to have to buy or rent the book from the library. This Saturday, October 23rd at 1 p.m. is our Adopt a Road cleanup project. We're going to be cleaning up Pete Ellis Drive. It's going to be fun because we're going to have ice cream at the end. And it's not too late to sign up. Just let Michael Sherman know. I hope it's going to be a nice day. But even if it isn't, thank you. It's going to be a nice day. So, and then finally, my last announcement, and this is a big one. World Polio Day is this Sunday, October 24th. Now, before I became president, I didn't actually realize that every year on October 24th, we celebrate World Polio Day. And of course, it's a recognition for Rotary's efforts and all of our partners in eradicating the disease. You should all, as Rotarians, have received an email from Polio Plus, which is packed with information. Also, this month's Rotary magazine features a number of stories on the polio eradication. It's not over yet, but we're getting close. So 2 messages this year. First, did you know that polio could be the 2nd human disease to ever be eradicated? Think about it. This is going to happen. And I'm sure most of us in this room and on Zoom know what the first disease to ever be eradicated was. It was smallpox. Okay. And the other message is that Rotary and its partners have reduced polio cases by 99.9% since 1988. That's pretty amazing. So the world has seen only 2 cases of the wild polio virus this year. They were both in January, but one is in Afghanistan and the other in Pakistan. So at the board meeting last week, we decided to adopt a small fundraising campaign in honor of World Polio Day. You will receive a survey following today's meeting that asks if you're willing to give $5 to help eradicate polio. Natalie can simply add that $5 to your next quarterly bill. If you'd like to give more than $5, of course, you're welcome. And then our club will send a check to the Rotary Foundation. And because of a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, our funds will be triple matched. It's a 2-to-1 grant. So if you give $5, that turns into 15. And if we multiply that by 50 or 60 or 70, that's going to be a significant donation from our club. So I look forward to everyone extending your generosity, and thank you in advance for that. And now I'd like to invite Jim Bright, who's going to introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much, President Sally. And it's my pleasure today to introduce our keynoter, Wendi Goodlett. And Wendi is President and CEO of Habitat for Humanity of Monroe County, and she has served in that capacity since 2018. Wendi worked extensively in development and advancement before taking on her current CEO role. Most recently as Director of Development for Major Gifts at the I.U. Kelly School of Business. Prior to joining Habitat, Wendi volunteered for more than a decade in many capacities, including as a construction leader and as a member of the Family Selection Committee at Habitat. She also served on the board of directors for 5 years. In 2013, Wendi was awarded the affiliate's Volunteer of the Year Service Award. Wendi graduated from Hanover College with a Bachelor of Arts in Communication degree. Fellow Rotarians, please join me in a warm welcome for the leader of Habitat for Humanity in Monroe County, Wendi Goodlett.
Thank you all for welcoming us today. I want to say too that we are grateful for your impact here locally, both myself and my daughter Bailey, who's here today, were Rotary scholars. So I have a very special connection to being in this room with Rotarians. I am so excited that you have chosen to honor Charlotte this year. And I know that it is especially special for you to be honoring one of your own. Charlotte and I have spoken about the incredible need for affordable housing in our community. And I think the reason Habitat's mission resonates so much with Charlotte is not only because she loves Bloomington and the people who live here, but because she has been so devoted to Rotary's efforts. The pillars of Rotary's mission align with the outcomes that safe, affordable housing provides for Habitat families. Fighting poverty, reducing or eliminating disease, supporting education, all of this not only being done at a local level, but on an international scale as well for both Rotary and Habitat. Under fighting poverty, 1 in 7 people in the US spend half or more of their income on housing. Habitat's work helps lift families out of poverty by providing an affordable place to live, while the money they invest in their mortgage often reduces the cost burden of housing and helps build generational wealth. Reducing and eliminating disease, the amazing work you've done with polio. But did you know that where you live may be the strongest indicator and predictor of health? 1 in 4 people live in conditions that harm their health and safety. Up to 40% of asthma cases may be attributed to factors inside the home. Things like mold, pests, chemicals. Then there's the psychological stress of not having stable housing. This affects both parents and children. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, if the place that you were living was unsafe, you didn't have a safe place to shelter from the pandemic itself. Supporting education. We see this time and time again here locally. We hear from the parents that we work with that their children's grades improve when they move into their Habitat home. Many of our families spend a great deal of time and energy moving from one unaffordable and unsafe place to another, hoping that the next place is just a little bit better. That's really difficult when you're a child, and it's stressful for the parents. We have a family right now that we're working with that's living in an overcrowded situation. So the children don't have beds to sleep in. They're sleeping on couches at night. So that's not very conducive to good sleep, which means that when they get up and go to school the next day, they're not able to perform their best. They don't have a place to study. If you don't have a bed to sleep in, it's unlikely that you have a quiet, dedicated place for study. And when you're spending too much of your income on housing, you don't have time to dedicate to your children to help them with their studies and to be involved in their schools. But our Habitat families, because we've lifted that burden for them, have the time, and they are so anxious to be involved in the school that they know their children are going to stay in for several years. They also get to plan for the future, which is something many of them don't have the opportunity to do prior to acquiring their Habitat home. It's just day to day. They just don't have the time, energy, or money to plan for the future. I love that our work, both Rotary and Habitat, is international. Habitat works in 70 countries and has housed 35 million families. Habitat for Humanity of Monroe County tithes. We're one of the highest tithing affiliates in the country. We tithe nearly $100,000 per year, and that funding gets divided between El Salvador and Uganda. And then finally, the work that we do creates a community, a sense of belonging. And we all know how that feels to be able to come together, whether virtually or in person, with people who are part of our community. And that is a big piece of what Habitat does. So I want to take a deeper dive into what we do here locally. So Habitat for Humanity's origination goes back to a place called Koinonia Farm It was an interracial community outside of Americus, Georgia, led by farmer and biblical scholar Clarence Jordan. This was at a time where many Black families were living in incredibly poor conditions, and he saw the inequity and decided that everyone deserved a decent place to live. He created what he called partnership housing. All people were treated equally, resources were shared, and they placed a great responsibility on being good stewards of the land. He was eventually joined by Habitat co-founders Millard and Linda Fuller. And I want to point out that in this slide, the keywords are affordable and partnership. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that goes back to that historical founding that Clarence Jordan envisioned when he created Koinonia Farm. I want to talk a little bit about the impact of the pandemic on our families and on our affiliate. Between March 2020 and March 21, we started 3 houses. So that's a big difference between what we normally do and what we were doing at that time. We housed 8 individuals versus you can see in 2019-20, we housed 36 individuals. This was entirely thanks to our crew leaders. These are dedicated men and women who come out week after week. They learn their skills about how we build houses on the job. They get on the job training, and then they help coordinate the volunteers, typically, who come out to help us build. But during the pandemic, the crew leaders were the only ones building the homes. So we could not have even dreamed of doing those 3 if it were not for them. Volunteer labor is how we keep our homes affordable. We have to buy the construction materials just like anyone else, but it's that volunteer labor that allows us to sell them affordably to the homeowners. The funding for those 3 houses were provided by Women Build, which has been going on for 21 years in our community. If you know a woman in Bloomington, you probably have known somebody who's worked on our Women Build job site. And then we had a group of cyclists who during the pandemic weren't able to race like they normally do. So they did a fundraising effort in conjunction with achieving the goal of Everesting a hill in Monroe County. That means climbing that hill enough times that it equates to the height of Mount Everest. They did it not only once, they achieved it 3 times and raised over $40,000 to help us during the pandemic, which was fantastic. Okay. The need is so much greater than what is represented here. When we talk about what we normally do in a year, we don't have a good way of measuring what we could be doing if we had the funding and the staffing to do it. We had to close our application window for nearly 2 years. Part of that was pandemic, but part of that was simply we could not build homes fast enough. We don't like families waiting in our program more than about 12 to 18 months. We have many, many families in our program who have now been with us for over 2 years. When we did open the application window last spring, we handed out 75 applications. We admitted 7 families into the program. Again, we are only limited by the funds that we have to build these houses. So when we talk about need for housing, it can be one of several things. It can be that the home that a family is living in is substandard. So faulty electrical, a leaking roof that maybe leads to mold, poor insulation, so they're spending too much money on their utility bills. It could be that they are overcrowded, the situation I talked about earlier. Because we are one of the least affordable places to live in the state of Indiana, in order to afford a decent place, a lot of times families will double up or triple up. We want to get them out of that overcrowded situation. It could also be that they're spending too much of their income on their housing. We consider anything greater than 30% of their income to be unaffordable. They have to have an ability to pay back that affordable mortgage. That's a key piece of our program. It's a huge revenue source for us. We are the lender. We hold those mortgages. So the monthly mortgage payments come back to Habitat for us to cycle back into the program. And the willingness to partner. I think this is the key to our community. It's key to families getting to know one another and to understand that there are people in Bloomington and Monroe County who truly care about them, want to see them succeed. For a lot of those families, it's the first time anyone in their life has believed that they could accomplish something so tremendous. What I love about it is that once they see that they can achieve that goal of home ownership, building their own home, it starts a cycle of them reaching for other goals, going back to school, applying for that next job. And we see a lot of success come out of that. It's a huge commitment. 250 hours of sweat equity is a big lift for these families. When you think about working a full-time job or a couple of jobs, trying to take care of children or aging parents, and trying to be involved as much as possible, adding those volunteer hours is a really big commitment. Another huge contributor to success of our families is the classes that we offer and the budgeting that we require families to go through. So we got to witness that during the pandemic. That was highlighted that we had prepared them well. Nearly every family, we did outreach to every homeowner and current family in our program. Nearly everyone had been impacted in some way. Their hours were reduced, their pay was reduced, or they simply were laid off from work. We offered everyone a forbearance who needed it. We had 12 families take us up on it. And I am very happy to report that at the end of their forbearance period, every family resumed payments to Habitat, and all but one have actually caught up on their payments. So that means at some point in time, they were making double or triple payments during that time period to catch back up. They understand how important it is to be a responsible homeowner and a responsible borrower. So that one that is still a couple months behind, we will work with to modify the loan. We will put those payments at the end of the mortgage. So just extend the term out a little bit rather than requiring a balloon payment, which is happening with some lenders. So I really do believe that this was the key to it. I think these families had planned for the unexpected. That's what we talked to them about. And so that's why they were able to get through such a rough period. And as most of you probably know, low-income families were more adversely affected than anybody else in our communities. All right, so you will see some numbers up here. Poverty rates, there is a Monroe County rate, which is lower than the rate in Bloomington. I want to remind you that cost burden means greater than 30% of your income is going towards your housing. Severely cost burden means more than 50%. And there are plenty of people who are spending more than 50%. And when you think about a low income family, 50% is still not a lot of money. Having 50% left is not a lot to spend on other things. So if you were working 40 hours a week, you would need to make a wage of $18 per hour to afford a 2-bedroom apartment in Bloomington. If you've been listening to and watching the news, many companies are just now reaching that $18 an hour threshold, and it's only a limited number of them. So you can see that there has been a huge gap in what wages are in Bloomington versus what the cost of living is in Bloomington. I'm happy that employers are beginning to reach that threshold, but certainly it's not enough to solve the housing crisis that we have. So when we talk about, I don't know if I missed a slide or not. There are the poverty statistics if I missed that slide. When we talk about Habitat mortgages, we keep them below 30% of gross income, which means that families have more of their income to spend on things like healthcare, medication, healthy food, reliable transportation. That's a big one. If you can only afford a car that doesn't run reliably, that puts you in jeopardy with your job. So being able to afford a reliable source of transportation is critical to their success at work as well. Education. For most of our families, they never even considered what would come after high school for their children. And they now have enough money to be able to begin putting some away to think about that education in the future. As I said before, we are the lender, we hold the mortgages, so that is a funding source that comes back to us. So the highlight I want to make on this slide is homeownership. We are the only ones in Monroe County providing a path to affordable homeownership. Homeownership is the key to equity. It is the key to building generational wealth. It is, if we could do more of it, we would provide greater opportunities for all families. The barriers that we address as an affiliate are housing inventory. Obviously, we're building houses, so we're adding to the inventory. Another barrier to homeownership is the increase in housing prices. So that is greatly outpacing the increase in incomes for families. Again, we're providing that affordable mortgage. Another barrier, down payment, closing costs, and interest rates. That keeps homeownership out of reach for a lot of people. And we address all of those. We have very low down payments. Closing costs can get wrapped into their mortgage to make that more affordable. And we provide a zero interest mortgage. Housing is definitely a racial equity issue. Low income households have a 50.8% homeownership rate for white families versus 24.1%, so less than half of low income Black households are homeowners. This contributes to overall wealth disparities. And that again is generational. The things that have led to this are systemic inequities, including discriminatory housing policies and institutional barriers. They hamper homeownership rates for households of color. Habitat provides opportunities for equitable access to housing. And one of the biggest ways we do that at the national level is advocacy. And that does come down to us locally. My good friend John Zodi is here today from HAND. We work with HAND very closely to access HUD funding. That's something that I have been privileged to get to advocate for over the last several years with our senators and congressmen and women in Washington, D.C. That funding is critical to our success. So I'm excited to get to share a little bit of news with you about our third neighborhood, Osage Place. What makes this neighborhood so tremendous to me is that it is in an area of opportunity. It is within the city of Bloomington. There is access to RCA Park, Switchyard Park, the Beeline Trail, public transportation, all of the amenities of downtown. Many of our homeowners will be closer to their jobs there. So I love being able to place families in areas of opportunity. We have 12.5 acres. One of the beautiful full circle moments was when we did our groundbreaking out at Osage Place. Charlotte was there. And the county commissioners actually gifted Habitat 4.5 of those 12.5 acres. Charlotte was a county commissioner when that land was purchased. So she was very, very happy that it had come to Habitat so that we could build homes for families. But it's expensive. It's expensive to develop a neighborhood. Phase 1 is going to cost us between $1.3 and $1.4 million for the infrastructure alone. Then we have the cost of building the houses on top of that. We're planning to do 30 homes in phase 1. Phase 2 will be over $2 million for infrastructure, and we will be able to house another 39 families. So nearly 70 families total when that neighborhood is built out. It's only been possible by funding from private donors. We've had a tremendous gift to the affiliate from private donors, the mortgages that I talked about, and certainly the city of Bloomington by providing us with funding through various sources. We hope that we'll be there about 7 years. If we can accelerate the building of homes, it'll be less than that. And before we know it, we will need to find the next place to build. And so it will all begin again. Certainly material costs have been an issue over the past several months. If anybody pays attention to lumber prices, last spring, there was a 400% increase over the year before. Those dimensional lumber prices have come back down, but other materials are still expensive. Things tend to shift around. So steel is expensive. Vinyl products are just not available. So we have supply chain issues as well. We estimate that our costs have increased by 20 to 30%. And that's a strain on us. And that obviously means the more it costs us to build a house, the less that we have to put back into the program. We also have labor and subcontractor shortages. There is a high demand right now for subcontractor work, so it's difficult for us to get people scheduled. I tell people that I meet all the time, if you have someone who a 4-year degree is not ideal for them, please consider going into the trades. There is a huge future in doing trade work, and it's something that's been missing from our educational system, unfortunately, for quite a while, which is why we're in the situation that we're in now. So some other fun and important details about Osage Place. If you remember what I said about Koinonia Farm, being good stewards of the land was an emphasis. We are also trying to do that in Osage Place. Every home will be net zero energy ready. That means they will be wired for solar. There is a program in Bloomington called Solar for All, and it's based on our model of sweat equity. The solar panels are donated, and families put in their time and energy to help install solar panels on other people's houses, and then they get to install solar panels on their own. So families will be able to apply for that program. But the house that we're building right now in partnership with the Whirlpool Corporation will have solar panels installed thanks to Whirlpool's funding for that. We're also trying to build to better standards. So every house in Osage Place will have at least one 0-step entry that meets a visitability standard, meaning anybody who comes to that house to visit can get inside the house. We are installing water saving features and energy saving features. I think the estimate that I heard the other day was for a house with solar on it, they could see their energy costs as low as $10 a month. Again, meaning that family has more of their income to put towards other things that they need. I would love questions. Yes. Oh, sorry.
Can we ask you to wait to get a mic?
Microphone. That's fine, yes. And I'll try to repeat the question too.
What is the average cost per home?
Great question. So we are spending about $95,000. That's what we've budgeted this year for material costs for the home. So that's on top of the land and infrastructure costs, but about $95,000 for material costs. So we used to be at about $68 per square foot. Now we're at about $82 per square foot. On the last home that we completed, we've got these new ones under construction, so we have yet to see what the price of those is. But the builders that I've talked to in town tell people they can expect to spend $300 or more per square foot. So we're still keeping it way below what a lot of other builders are able to do.
Thank you, Wendy, for a really beautiful and informative presentation. As I understand it, though, you said that 10% of your budget is going to Uganda and El Salvador, both places that are infamous for corruption. I would like to know how you're certain that 10% of your money is not going into graft.
So the question is, how do we make sure that the money that we're sending to El Salvador and Uganda is used in the way that it's intended? We have habitat locations in those countries that we work very closely with. And that work is overseen by Habitat International. So we send people on trips during normal times to both locations. Uganda, not quite so much, but certainly El Salvador, we've sent several Global Villages trips there. So we are getting to see, and they have a reporting responsibility to us as well. So that work is being overseen by other pieces of Habitat at the international level. Thank you. And an important part of the international work too is not just housing, but other health issues. So in Uganda, every house that's built, they are doing microloans there. So they get their house built a little bit at a time, but every house that's built has a latrine, which is accessible to the entire community, not just the homeowners, because water contamination is a huge issue there. They also are providing sanitary products for young girls because a lot of times when they begin menstruating, they stop going to school because they don't have those products. So that is also a really key piece of what's happening in Uganda. AIDS and HIV are pretty prolific there. So Habitat has also worked with legal representatives in the country to ensure that children who are orphaned have the legal right to maintain that property and keep it in their family as well.
Can you tell me if the women's build has come back? I have saved the article from the newspaper some time ago.
We do have our Women Build program back. Last year, they did the fundraising for us, even though they were not able to come out and build. And we were able to pay for the houses last year, which was tremendous, especially given the pandemic. But this year, we welcomed volunteers back out to site. We surpassed $200,000 in fundraising for the first time ever. And that was with fewer builders. So we have the first two houses in Osage Place are actually funded by Women Build. Thank you.
I have a brand new kitchen faucet that I wanted to donate that I don't need. And I went to the website, but that didn't work. That seemed to be all about finances. So how do I get that to the Habitat for Humanity?
So you have a couple of options. You can either call our office and we would be happy to work with you on that. But you can also donate product to our Restore. So Restore is our retail outlet that takes donated product and sells that at an affordable price to members of our community. And those funds come back into our program to help pay for construction and recycling of houses, which means taking a Habitat house back and fixing the next family.
Okay, can you tell me what your telephone number is?
Telephone number is 812-331-4069.
If you had your druthers, would you put 70+ families in one location, or would you spread them out a little more?
That's a great question. What we are hoping that we can do by having them in one location is realize some efficiencies that we have not been able to realize in the past, even when we were building in other neighborhoods. So because we're building on slab for the first time, we think we'll be able to pour multiple slabs at once and save some money that way. We have our warehouse located out there, so we are hoping that we have fewer mobilization and demobilization costs. And from what we've seen in our Trailview neighborhood, they love living together in community. They are watching out for each other's children, taking meals to people when they're sick. We even had a homeowner in Trailview during the pandemic who helped her neighbors plant gardens so that they would have healthy food to eat and not have to spend so much of their income on their food.
Hi, Wendi.
Hi, John.
So yeah, a lot more intimidating than I thought it was going to be. First, thank you for the amazing work that you do. It's so important. I'm just sort of curious about the legacy of a Habitat home. How long families might stay in them? How do you deal with sort of long-term deferred maintenance on a home? And do they have the ability to sell the home and use the equity toward leveling up, so to speak? Sort of the long-term legacy.
Great question. So most of our families stay in their homes long-term. They say to us, this is my lifelong home. It's the place I want to welcome my children back to. I've been in communication with a woman who is considering selling her house, and her kids are begging her not to, because even though they've all moved out, they consider that the home that they grew up in, and they would like to see her stay there. So the majority of our families do stay. We have families every once in a while who have an opportunity. And we had one about a year ago who said, we have a job opportunity in Denver, Colorado. We would like to move. They were still in their mortgage. So we have first right of refusal on all of our houses while families are still in their mortgage. So they offered it back to Habitat. We were able to buy it back affordably. They get the equity out of their home, and then they were able to move on and do something else. So most of them don't choose to execute that option of moving. They can't sell it on the open market and realize the full appreciation in the home while they're still in their mortgage. But once they've paid off that mortgage, they can. And we report every year on how many families have paid off their mortgage each year. And we're getting ready to find a new way to celebrate those fulfilled mortgages, because it's such a key support for what we do. So great question. Thank you.
Okay. Wendi, thank you so much. I think we can all feel really good that Charlotte chose Habitat as the recipient of half of the proceeds from this year's Rotary Toast. And in recognition of your talk this week, Bloomington Rotary will be giving a donation to Wonderlab. So next week, we have Tom Morrison, Vice President for Capital Planning and Facilities at IU. And his topic is the Indiana University Master Plan Progress Report. Another really interesting and important topic. So before we close, I have one question for everyone. How many weeks until we benefit Habitat for Humanity and honor Charlotte Sitlow at the Rotary Toast? How many weeks, folks? 2. That's right. Holy heck. Okay. Let's close the meeting, if you will, by reciting the 4-way test plus 1 together. Of the things we think, say, or do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? And fifth, is it fun? Thank you.